is double rams, a pair of unusual Shang bronze vessels from the Yangzi region. And I really would like to thank Society for Asian Art once again offering me the opportunity to speak to you among the most informed enthusiasts about Asian art in general. It's always been a delight and honor to speak to Society for Asian Art, and so I grabbed at the opportunity. I'm very distinguished scholar could not come, so I would like to do it in this case. And as you know, as Peter pointed out, and we're about to celebrate the Year of the Monkey, but technically we're still in the Year of the Ram. So it's still a timely subject, and the ram traditionally has been understood as a symbol of auspiciousness, bringing good fortunes, because the pronunciation of the word ram, yang, and rhymed with the other word in Chinese for auspiciousness, 吉祥, xiang. So I like to say that indeed it has been a year of auspiciousness. Museum has accomplished tremendously, and now we're in the beginning of celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of the museum. As you can see downstairs, there's already a physical timeline to lay out some of the major milestones in the development of this great institution, and there are many more programs going on. But let's now go back to the topic of today, which is the double rams. So 1 year ago, the Nezu Museum of Art in Tokyo, Japan, organized an unprecedented exhibition featuring extraordinary works of art representing various animals from East Asian cultures. The exhibition was titled Animal Worship, as we can see here in the exhibition poster. The Nezu Museum chose this exhibition subject for a particular reason, because it owns one of the most celebrated ancient Chinese bronze vessels in the world, in the shape of two rams standing back to back, with the vessel in between. And 2015 was the year of the ram. That occasion was made doubly auspicious by the fact that the Nezu succeeded in borrowing the only other extant vessel of a similar shape in the collection of the British Museum. That was why the exhibition also had a subtitle reading, Welcoming the Double Ram Zun from the British Museum. As we know, Zun is a conventional label calling this kind of vessel, because we actually did not know the people who made them or used them, what kind of a label, what kind of utensil label they would use to call them. But conventionally today, we call zun, basically indicating a one vessel. Those two vessels form the centerpiece of the exhibition. And as you see here, where they were displayed at the Nezu Museum with a very happy person in between, looking at the exhibition. As far as I know, the Nezu exhibition was the first time when those two double ram zun came together, after they respectively entered the collections of the Nezu Museum of Art and the British Museum in the early 20th century. It was a very rare opportunity indeed, which prompted me to conduct a study of them in the context of the southern branch, or the southern bronze industry during the Shang period of ancient China. Peter mentioned that I subscribe to the national growth, national happiness. Indeed, I do. And studying bronzes is one secret that by which I have to keep myself happy from all the interesting work that I do on a daily basis. The term southern here refers to the Yangzi River region, which is more commonly known in China as the Changjiang Long River, Changjiang River region. In the West, it is more typically known as the Yangzi River. My research was particularly focused on the middle reach of the Yangzi River. Here you see the two double ram zun in individual portraits. Now, let me take London as the starting point of my discussion of those two double ram zun. Here, we see a recent picture of the Royal Academy of Arts at the Burlington House on Piccadilly in London. As we know, the largest ever exhibition of Chinese art was organized by the Royal Academy there in 1935 and 1936. More than 3,000 objects were presented in the exhibition, never heard of, never before, never after, including about 1,000 pieces lent from the Palace Museum in Forbidden City from China. Also, 2,000 borrowed from Europe, America, and Japan, both public museums and private collections. We remember well that the founder of our museum, Avery Brundage, for him, it was this exhibition that inspired him and turned him into an avid collector of Asian art, particularly Chinese art. He allegedly said, ever since that exhibition, he went broke, because every time he had more money, he wanted to buy art. Actually, because this exhibition drew a lot from private collections, actually about 60 of those pieces shown in the Burlington House exhibition eventually acquired by Avery Brundage and now in the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, where we are. One of the private lenders to the exhibition was Mr. Nezu Kaiichiro of Japan, who had been passionately collecting pre-modern Japanese and East Asian art. Mr. Nezu was a distinguished businessman, a railroad tycoon, to be particular. Those whose career included being president of the Tobu Railway Corporation Limited, one giant in Japanese railway business. His field of activities also included politics and education. Mr. Nezu did not view his collection as a private treasure house, but wished to share its enjoyment with the general public. That probably explained towards his willingness to lend to the Royal Academy exhibition. It was, however, only after his death that his son and heir, Kaiichiro Jr., established a foundation to preserve the collection in 1940 and 1941, opened the Nezu Museum in its current location in Aoyama, I think, Minami Aoyama, which had been the site of the Nezu family residence. So in the last centuries, the museum also had a renovation. Now they have a cutting-edge facility. If you have not visited Nezu Museum, or at least have not seen the new Nezu, it is absolutely a must when you visit Tokyo the next time. Oh, let me see. Mr. Nezu Kaiichiro lent 12 objects from his collection to the Royal Academy exhibition. Those included 3 ancient Chinese bronzes, such as the monumental Fanghe you see here, as indicated by the arrow. Fanghe is, again, another conventional term to describe that particular type of objects. So, where the arrow points at. Here is a better picture of the Fanghe vessel. It is the largest and the most magnificent bronze vessel of its type. Actually, it belonged to a set of 3, and all of them were collected by Mr. Nezu. Oh, let me see. Yeah. We know it was a complete set because the vessels were individually inscribed with 1 character on each vessel, indicating their relative position, left, center, right. So in other words, in the ancestral worship, the positioning of these 3 vessels are very specific. And this is one of the very rare cases where their positioning would be indicated through inscription. In this photo, the Nezu Fanghe was surrounded by the exhibition organizers, couriers, and scholars. The Japanese team included the famous professor of the time, Yashiro Yukio, who is this one, and Mr. Okada Tomoji is this one, representing the Yamanaka Company, as we know, a very well-known dealership in Chinese art, for which Mr. Nezu was a major client. The legendary collector of Chinese art, Sir Percival David, served as exhibition director, and here he was. And we know now, those Percival David Foundation collection of Chinese porcelain is among the very best. Now it's housed in the British Museum. Also seen here is another prominent collector, His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince of Sweden, who would later become King Gustav VI Adolf, who actually participated in archaeological expeditions in China. The finds from those expeditions contributed to the collection of the Museum of Far Eastern Antiquities in Stockholm, another major museum of Asian art. And here is His Royal Highness. But double ram zhuan, however, was not included in the Nezu loan. Interestingly, for those of you who can see this image well, you may notice actually there is a double ram zhuan in the case, in the background, and that's this one. That did not, however, come from the Nezu collection, as I mentioned. It was borrowed from another legendary collector, the famous George Eumopoulos, whose collection is now largely housed in the British Museum. At that time, he was a private collector based in London. And here is Mr. George Eumopoulos. He is about same age, exact same age as Mr. Nezu. Of Greek descent, Mr. Eumopoulos was a British collector of Chinese, Korean, and Near Eastern art. He worked for a London firm of Greek origin, specializing in private banking, but was also importers of rape, rice, cotton, and hemp from India. By the time he retired in 1934, he had risen to the position of vice president of the firm. Eumopoulos was a respected Orientalist, and since 1922, he turned his townhouse into a living museum. His collection of Asian art, called Oriental art at the time, grew to an enormous size, obliging him to add a 2-story museum to the back of his house. He was the one who founded the Oriental Ceramics Society and was its first president until his death. He organized and funded the publication of 11 volumes, 11 huge volumes. Our museum has a set. If you're interested, you can check it out to look at. 11 volumes illustrating and describing items from his collection during the 1920s and the 1930s, including the famous double ram zhuan. I think I may have a small picture here, yeah. One of the 3 co-authors of that tome, 11-volume tome, was Lawrence Binyon, who was also photographed in the previous picture. And here is double ram zhuan. And here is Lawrence Binyon, one of the 3 authors. He, however, was not the author responsible for the section on Chinese bronzes. That would be Yates, another famous scholar. So Mr. Eumopoulos had intended to bequest his collection to the British nation, but the Great Depression of the 1930s forced him to sell part of his collection in what was at that time called a princely gesture to the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum for £100,000 in 1934 and 1935. The exact year when the double ram zhuan we see here entered into the British Museum was 1936, and that's the year Avery Brundage in January went to see the show. So when it was landed to the show, it was still belonged to Eumopoulos. But when the show closed, it went to the British Museum. In 2003 and 2004, the exhibition called Treasures of the World's Cultures, organized by the British Museum, went to 4 cities in Japan, including Tokyo, at the Tokyo Metropolitan Art Museum. The British Museum's double ramzun was included in the exhibition, but it did not meet the other double ramzun at the Nezu Museum of Art. They were in the same city, but they did not get to meet. They would be reunited until 2015, the January of last year, exactly a year ago. You could even make a romance out of it. Here you see the double ramzun side by side again, and let us look at them carefully. Obviously, they are very similar. 2 rams stand back to each other, and between them is a vertical component decorated with an animal face motif, or we all know conventionally called taotie. The surface decoration of those 2 vessels is largely responsible for dating them to late Shang period or 13th to 12th centuries BCE. The reason that we call them ram, which are male sheep, is obviously the large curly horns that each animal carries. Here is an image of a real bighorn sheep. Curiously, the British Museum rams, the double rams on the British Museum vessel, each have a goatee, beard of a male goat. As we know, ram in real life does not have a goatee. Goatee belongs to goats, like this one, as we see here. So you must say that artists to take some measured artistic license. As we know, realism is only a relative term. The Nezu rams appear to be more accurate in this detail, as they do not have goatee. Yet, depiction of a real animal in its nature state was clearly not the only intention of the bronze caster here. The rams are all covered with a uniform pattern of scales, which have nothing to do with the ram's skin in real life. Here we see the full view again, covered entirely by a scale pattern. The scroll pattern in sunken lines that appears on the head of the rams have nothing to do with the realism either. It is a standard pattern on bronze of that period, often appearing on the taotie motif. Using the British Museum Shun as example, we can see that the ram's eyeballs, pointed eye sockets, and the surface pattern of the face are similar as those of the taotie motif on the vertical part between the rams. Indeed, the major difference is the horns. The taotie motif is equipped with bottle-shaped horn, as we see here. And the taotie on ram's face, of course, is adorned with the ram's horn. In the case of a Nezu vessel, the surface decoration on the ram's head is very similar to that of the British Museum Shun, as we can see here, side by side. But quite different from the surface design on the vertical part. The taotie motif on the vertical part, as seen on your right, shows a clearly defined image set against a network of fine spirals. And we can clearly see eyes, the nose, the double jaw, and the horns, which may be somewhat related with the ram's horns. The eyeballs of the taotie motif have a dented pupil. The same dented pupil appear on the ram's head. So, the point I like to make here is, here we can call this as an image, because the primary motif is set off by the background pattern. The background pattern is formed with very densely packed lay-one or spiral design. Because of difference in density, the image stands out. However, here, the pattern, sunken line, without a background contrast, it is hard sometimes to see what's going on. So this, the big distinction between these two, this you call has a confined, a well-defined image. The other is more as a pattern. As you can tell, compare the two Taoist motifs on the two double ram zhuan. The pupils are different, the horns are different. Most importantly, the Taoist motif on the Nezu zhuan shows a distinct image, while the motif on the British Museum zhuan is presented in bas-relief. Because the scroll on the Taoist motif and in the background are similar on the British Museum piece, and of the same density, the Taoist motif is not as distinctive as images on the Nezu zhuan. In other words, again, you can call this as image. This is the image hard to read. You cannot tell which is the primary part aside from the background. For example, you can see the eyeball very well, and you can have to struggle to understand this is the eye socket with a hook. Which about this part? It's hard to tell. Like here, you really can see the eye socket extremely well. So this is a major stylistic difference between these two vessels. And this is by which we also stylistically date this one as later than this one. Because as we know, in the Shang bronzes, the scholars, through decades of work, has established a fairly accurate measurement of stylistic evolution, and in which the style progresses from this type to that type. However, to be accurate, we can only say stylistically this one is later than this one. We may or may not be able to say the making of the vessel, this one is later than this one. Because once the new styles was established, that did not necessarily mean the older style was abandoned. I'm just looking at myself, my own wardrobe, which is very limited. Every year, my wife is kind enough to buy me a jacket or two, but I never threw out the older ones. I reuse them, I recycle them. And fashion, for men in particular, comes in cyclical fashions. Something out of date for the last 2 years will come back into fashion in 10 years. So the old style, the new style exist at the same time. The making of them could be around the same time, but stylistically, there is a sequence. I hope make this point clear. So the variation in the Taoist motif, as I mentioned, is a primary difference between those two double ram zhuan. The proportions of the two rams, the two zhuans, are also different. The ram's head on the Nezu, which is on your right, projects much more outward than the British Museum one. The rams of the British Museum appear to stand more straight and alertly, while the rams of the Nezu zhuan appear in a more relaxed stance with a much more curved body. The thigh of each ram is decorated with a curved dragon. Here on the British Museum zhuan on your left, you see the dragon's body. But again, not very clear at all, because the background pattern and the dragon's own pattern are of the same density. The bottle-shaped horn, these are two horns, if you can make it out on the slides, and the eye. Oh, this is the horn. The slides actually, the arrow out of sequence. This is the horn, that is the horn, and that's the dragon's body. That's the eye. Here's the eye. Okay. Here's the eye. Yeah. And the open mouth. That's the open mouth. So you are looking at a dragon standing, doing a, top stand with heads down, tail up, mouth, eyes, horns, body. Yeah, right there. I guess I'm not very good in high school in doing that, so I don't even remember what it is called. Yet, the motif is hard to see, as it is buried in a scale pattern composed of similar sunken lines. By comparison, the dragon on the Nezutron on your right is distinct, set off as an image by the densely packed background spirals. It is far easier to see there is a dragon on the Nezu ram's thigh. The actual details of the dragons are different between the British Museum's Zhuan and the Nezutron, but their structure is similar. Curiously, the head of the Nezu dragon is not clearly defined. I'm talking about the one over there. Another interesting difference lies in the ram's hoof. It is well defined in the case of British Museum Zhuan, but not on the Nezu Zhuan, which appears really like a pair of sticks or columns. The British Museum ram have L-shaped appendages, perhaps suggesting fur under the belly. The Nezu rams do not have them. The British Museum Zhuan also has the remnants of a hook on the underside, suggesting that a small bell was hung from there originally. Numerous other bronzes of that period carry small bells. Curiously, the Nezu Zhuan does not have a similar device. Actually, even though it's a very small, often invisible part of a vessel, which is a hook, originally intended for hanging bells, because there are examples, surviving examples, not only having the hook, but also having the bells. Itself is a very interesting subject. In my view, it may be related with the culture of the nomads from the north or northwest part of China. As we know, that small implements from nomadic cultures often tend to have rattles. And this is something that not necessarily original to the central plains of China, in the center part of China. And this interaction between the Chinese bronze cultures in the Yellow River region in central plains with the nomadic culture is a subject that is very much worthwhile pursuing. And we can start like detective from a very small piece of evidence, which is a hook with a bell under numerous objects of bronze vessels. One assumes that it was there to make noise in motion, because when it stands still on altar, it would not make any noise and it would not be visible. So that caused the question of how the vessels were carried about, and whether part of the carrying about was part of their usage as well. For example, just to make a analogy of really into land of speculation. In Indian art, we often see the sculpture of Ganesha with his parents, Shiva and Parvati, and the base of which often have holes. Those are the idols to be carried, prayed through during the festival. Does that remind us some of the vessels in ancient Chinese bronzes in their original function would have a similar appearance as part of the ritual before they settled down, became stationary in the imperial or in the royal ancestral temples. But that's another story for another time. The rams have a hollow inside with an oval-shaped opening on the top of the vertical part. Each zhuan is therefore a container in the shape of two rams carrying a jar. The name zhuan is a conventional Chinese term indicating a vessel usually understood to contain wine. But in this case, there is no evidence of what the vessel may have carried in their original state. We simply Don't know. And, but in terms of typology, if we focus on the vertical part of it, and I assume you now remember well the shape look like, you can imagine this shape originated from a hole that had open sort of rounded corner, rectangular opening, and bulge out towards the end, have legs or pedestals, but the artist dramatized it by adding 2 rams onto it, turning a functional vessels into a functional vessel sculpture, if you will. The nature of the double ramzun being a vessel, taking on the form of a composite of animals, finds a comparable expression in a vessel in the collection of the National Museum of China, which you will see now. And that is the famous 4-ram fangzun. I think many of you may have remembered this piece because it was surely included in the first ever exhibition of Chinese archaeological finds from People's Republic of China in 1975, before China-US normalized its diplomatic relationship. That show came to San Francisco. And this is one of the great masterpieces that China has and China sent. And it may also have been included in other Chinese archaeological exhibition. Surely it was included in 1995 exhibition in the Guggenheim called 5,000 Years of Chinese Art. Interestingly, the animal in this case is also ram. Instead of 2 rams carrying a jar, 4 rams stand back to back diagonally. Their hollow bodies merged with the square form of the lower part of the vessel, appearing as if trapped, because here you see the ram's legs belong to this ram, and this legs and the other one invisible, you can see. So here we only see the 4 rams, the other one in the back. So they double the size, the number of the ram, and turning another vessel called zhuan with a large mouth into a vessel sculpture. And they are together supported the upper part of the vessel, which soars with a large, gracefully flaring mouth. The design principles of the double ramzun and the 4-ram zun are evidently similar, and they both demonstrate a lively interest in animal sculpture. Between the British Museum and the Nezu one is closer to the 4-ram zun in its style of surface decoration, featuring clearly defined image set off by background spirals. And you may also notice the 4-ram zun, the surface largely covered by scale pattern as well. As we speak about clearly defined images set off by background spirals, for example, on the 4-ram fangzun, each ram is flanked by 2 birds with high crests. And in the middle, you see the rubbing. And very clearly, not only you see the beak, a fantastic crest, the body, and also the legs with claws standing profile. Again, it is defined clearly because it was set off by the densely packed background spiral pattern. So stylistically, this 4-ram zun is closer to the Nezu version in terms of the motif. The bird appear flush on the surface of the vessel, and as an image set off by the background spirals, as I mentioned, that we can see in the rubbing in the center of the slide. The shape of the ram's head on all the 3 vessels is similar. So is the surface decoration. Like the British Museum ram, the rams of the 4-ram fangzun also sport a goatee. In addition, there is a notched flange in front of the goatee. Such stylistic differences in detail may be meaningful in suggesting in relative dating among the three vessels. In my opinion, as I mentioned, the British Museum's Zun stylistically was the earliest. The second comes the Nezu Zun, and the four ram Zun in the collection of the National Museum of China was the last, as it had more embellishments. But difference may be very small. All of them can be broadly dated to the late Shang dynasty period of the 13th and 12th centuries BCE by comparing with other more common vessels whose dates we know that can have been securely dated. Like the double ram Zun, the four ram Fangzun, Fang means square. Fangzun also feature scale patterns on its surface, as already mentioned. This artificial use of a scale pattern as skin of an animal is popular, I now must mention, among bronzes of the middle Yangzi River region, which now leads us to the discussion of a southern bronze industry of the Shang period. Actually, the four ram Fangzun itself was unearthed in 1938 in Huangcai, Ningxiang, Hunan province, in the middle region of the Yangtze River. I give you this picture too early. I just want to mention, we know the place where the four ram Fangzun in the National Museum of China was excavated. It has a precise location of excavation and date, 1938, at Huangcai, Ningxiang, Hunan province, in the middle region of the Yangtze River. And for example, other comparable example, as the scale pattern as seen on this vessel in the shape of a wide ball, unearthed also in the Hunan province. Besides the scale pattern, the ball also features images of dragons on its side, as we see here, similar, comparable to those on the Nezu rams. And here on your left is the detail of the dragon on the ball, and on your right is the dragon on the Nezu ram. And here are the details of the heads, and we can see that the surface design on the balls, the wide ball's head, is similar to that on the double ram Zun, and its dented pupils are particularly similar as those on the Nezu ram. Both the British Museum Zun and Nezu Zun are said to come from Hunan. We don't know for sure, but the dealer, original dealer, claimed that it came from Changsha, the capital of the Hunan province. The comparison with objects having clear provenance of excavation, such as the four ram Fangzun and the wide ball, makes it beyond the reasonable doubt that both double ram Zun indeed originated in Hunan in the middle region of the Yangtze River, because their stylistic features are peculiar to the Hunan region. So now, let us put the double ram Zun in the context of a distinctive southern bronze industry in the middle Yangtze River region. But before we do that, maybe I call for a short break. Thank you.